Welcome back to the home front. I'm your host, Reed Galen. Today, I'm joined by Kat Abughazeleh, also known as Kat Abu. She is online and she is a terror to the MAGA people, and I could not be happier to have her today. She is a contributor to Mother Jones and also Zateo, previously of Media Matters for America. Today, she is coming to us from the Windy City. Kat, welcome.
Hi, Reed.
All right. So, it's interesting that strange bedfellows and all that. I'm not even sure how you and I met, but it would seem to me that we're both from Texas, right? Or have Texas roots.
I'm
We
from
both,
Dallas
yeah. And I went to high
and
school
don't
in
like
Dallas.
it.
I went to high school in Dallas, won't move back. You were a Republican in your younger life. I was a Republican until
Mhm.
about 10 years ago. So, I grew up in it. But here we are. Um, I'm not a Democrat. I'm not a Republican. I'm a solid independent. But here we are in the context of the last year or so. We've gotten to know each other. We've had, hours worth of conversations about various things. And what I was, most heartened by, candidly, was that despite our differences in upbringings and our differences in places in the world, our differences in age, at the end of our conversations, we tend to be a heck of a lot closer than if you were looking at us on paper based on resumes, all that other stuff, than you'd think we'd be. And to me, that's heartening, right? If
Oh, absolutely.
almost 50-year-old white guy in the suburbs, and you much younger, much hipper, much more talented than me, probably to the left of me on on the the whatever x-axis of American politics. But so tell me, why is that? I mean, is it just because I'm such a great guy? Is it because you're such a great gal? Or is it because you think, just to get a little philosophical here for you, that there are some things that are sort of fundamental in whether or not that's humanity or America, that, like, if we're able to sit down and, sort of just hash things out, that it's really, we're not that far apart.
I mean, I would say it's a mix, but basically, like, you listen. That's the big
Mm,
thing. I mean, you and I first met in DC in person. You
yeah,
DM'd me on Twitter and was like, I'm gonna be in DC when I was living there.
right,
Let's like get coffee or something. We went to Kramer's. We ended up sitting there for like 5 hours. The
right.
conversation did not slow at all. And, honestly, I was a little like sussed out. This is, an older white dude, Lincoln Project affiliated, maybe like a bit corny. I don't know. Like, not that those are bad, like inherently bad things, but I was like, do I
Right.
really want to get like a whole ass lunch with this guy? Like, will it just be him talking over me the whole time? Will I get lectured? Like, will it be the typical things that I would expect of like men in your age group, frankly?
Mansplaining.
Mansplaining, very much so. And for the time that we've known each other, you have not done that to me once. In fact, I mean, we do have a lot of similarities in our upbringing and how we see things. I think we're both kind of on like the ideologically like libertarian or just like leave people the fuck alone
Right.
type things. But when I tell friends about you and I always say good things, I'm like, oh no, whatever you're thinking, it's wrong. Like, he's actually cool because he listens. Even if you don't agree with something, you actually want to know my perspective on something. You're not asking to like set me up for some other monologue. And so I think that's like the big thing. If you want to connect with people across generational differences, gender differences, age differences, oh, I said that twice,
Right.
ideological differences, whatever, you need a baseline of respect, and you have that. And I think that's pretty rad.
Well, so let's talk about that. In the context of 2024, obviously, we both had enormous frustrations. And I think most of those were legitimate at the
Oh,
time
that
and
was
were
another similarity is our frustration with the Democrats.
right, and were borne out by the both the campaign and the outcome. And that's the one thing that the listeners have heard me say is, I spent a lot of time on the road this fall, going around to every voter cohort, most of the target states, and you could tell that showing up to someone's door 8 weeks before an election or 6 weeks before an election with a bunch of stuff in your hand, right? That's not persuasive, and that's not persuasion. That's maybe get out the vote operations, but certainly what I've recognized over the course of however many years I've been fighting alongside Democrats is, um, that, so many of the core constituencies and so many of those, let's be clear, Kat, millions of voters who stayed home did not feel heard, did not feel seen. And it's not a new phenomenon, right?
And it's not on them either.
Right,
Like people are like, oh, there's no way Harris could have won. That is some loser ass talk.
right.
Like, you had so many people come out in 2020 and they just didn't come out this time because bad campaigning. Democrats are so good at snatching defeat from the jaws of victory. And I'm not just here to Democrat bash. This is a way to figure out where to go next. Like, some people just want to complain without any solutions. You and I have solutions. It's just
Yeah.
a matter of people want to listen to them.
Well, and that's the thing is, I mean, I've historically said to my Democratic friends, I can't believe we ever lost to y'all, right? And I think I want to use Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez as a bit of a pivot on different things. But the first part of what I want to bring up about her was, there were a bunch of voters in her district, which is not a moderate district was it Brooklyn and the Bronx, or Brooklyn and Queens, excuse me, who voted for Trump, and she asked them, why did you vote for Trump and me? You guys listen. You understand us. We believe that you care about people like us, which, of course, is the height of irony because, of course, Donald Trump doesn't care at all about them, but that's the perception he leaves with otherwise individual, everyday, average, working class Americans is like, yeah, he may not be one of me, but he channels my frustration, my anger, whatever it is. And obviously, I think that AOC has always been someone, she goes back to her days as a bartender, who has done her best, I think. And look, I don't agree with her on everything, and nor do we have to. But I think she has made herself a champion of, the little guy at the end, and the Democratic Party is either unwilling or incapable of doing that. And the thing that I have found, and I promise I will not lecture, is that the more that democratically, big D democratically aligned groups do that in places, the more the party apparatus gives them a hard time for it.
Right. I mean, Democrats are so big about like waiting your turn.
Mm,
And it should not be up to the Democratic Party of when your turn shows up. It should be up to the people. It should be up to those with new ideas, with, big leaps that they want to take.
right.
And instead, it's all about like this incremental progress, which, is necessary in any functioning society, but that doesn't mean that's all we have. And I look at, AOC, who has done nothing but try to fight for what's best, and the way that Democrats will sabotage everything, will give Trump the upper hand, then allow someone progressive to have power is ridiculous. I mean, you're just showing that you're more aligned with the Republicans than you are with your own constituency. It's no wonder people didn't show up.
Well, can we just take a second to discuss the word progressive? Because I have met and become friends with folks like you who probably either consider themselves progressive or would be considered progressive in, let's say, the democratic universe. And what I have found is, frankly, far less like overarching ideology, and far more, like, this is like, maybe it should be this way because it would be better for everybody, right? Which is really, to me, not progressive as much as it is like common sense, if that makes sense. Which is like,
You would
if
think
you
so.
have if you have a yawning wealth gap, right? Okay, it's to that is an objective reality, right? Like math tells us that.
Yeah.
So then the question is, it's a lot less ideological necessarily about how you fix that, and more, problem based, and say, okay, if we know these are the things that have led us to that situation, what are some ways, practically speaking, you can lead us out of them? And that's, to your point, is I think that, you know, economically speaking, the elite of the Democratic Party, the leadership of the Democratic Party, is aligned with, with wealthy interests, and that's not a new thing. But I think that you're seeing that again, if voters, your voters, right, or people who would otherwise vote for a Democrat because they're running against someone like Donald Trump, says either one, you're not speaking to me at all, or two, there's no difference. That's a significant problem from an electoral perspective, which is, you have to go win elections. And that's the other part too that I don't think too many of our friends seem to not understand is like, no, if you want the things you say you want, like you actually have to go win,
Yeah.
right? You have to do the things you have to win. And that means once in a while, you got to take the gloves off and punch some people in the nose, metaphorically speaking, of course. And it's like, oh, you guys fight so dirty. I don't know how you do it. We don't want to get down in the mud. They lie about everything. Well,
You call it an existential election, fight fucking dirty.
well, and if it's an existential election, and then the election, we lose the election, and people are like, we'll get them next time. Was it really that existential? Right. And
Exactly. And I mean,
to
like,
me,
if I'm
I think
fighting
it
for my
was.
life,
To me, I
if I'm
think it
fighting for my
was.
life, I'm kicking that guy in the balls.
Right.
Like, it's that simple. I think the thing that really frustrates me is a lot of people will write off progressivism, which once again, like there's this diversity of thought that the Democratic Party doesn't like embracing. It's, for example, when after the Biden debate, I was one of the first, like prominent like online pundits, which is such a loser category to belong to, but that's
right.
what I
Welcome.
do when I rant online. Yeah.
Right.
You and me, buddies. But I said, he needs to step down. This is fucking ridiculous. We're all just pretending at this point. And I got so much shit because I disagreed with what was happening in power. And then as soon as he stepped down, it was like, oh, yay, Kamala, blah, blah, blah. And then, like, anytime you criticize Democrats, whether it's the candidate, whether it's not funding a genocide, whether it's not giving your constituents what they actually need, especially when you're funding so many other things, like the amount of money that goes into our military, there is no goddamn reason anyone should die because they can't afford medical care. But it's all these things, and they say, well, we can't do it any other way. Why don't we try just for kicks? I believe this is an existential election. I believe things are about to get really bad. I think we'll
Right.
eventually get better. I say this all the time, but fascism is antithetical to the human condition. It'll get
Right.
better eventually, but how many people are going to get hurt in the meantime? And so, why not try something different? I said on a stream last week, I said, Democrats hire me to run your 2028 campaign. And if you lose, you can execute me on live television. And I'm being so serious. Like, we need to have stakes here. Instead of hiring Hillary campaigners, Hillary campaign staff, they should not be allowed to touch any election operation with a 50-foot pole. That should just not be allowed. And call me an idealist. That's fine. I want to try to strive for my ideals. I don't think that's a bad thing. People say that it's not realistic. Oh, it's unrealistic that in this country we would have multiple parties, or it's unrealistic in this country that we would have, healthcare for all. Okay, why don't we make it a reality then? It's that
Right.
simple. Let's try to make it a reality instead of admitting defeat right away. It's like when Democrats immediately just capitulate to Republicans, make them fight for it, goddamn. Like, but make them try to grab something from your old octogenarian hands. It's that simple.
From
Like,
your
just
bony fingers.
your bony skeletal fingers. Like, stop just giving up. That's some pussy shit.
All right, so let me. I want to rewind a little bit on a couple of those things because exactly,
Yep. We
and
rewind.
this is something I've talked about a lot, and I've written about a fair bit. Is you're sitting with a bunch of Democrats, usually donors, and I've been asked this question, Kat, so many times. Why is it you guys are so good at messaging, and why are we so bad at messaging? Right, and what I've always said is, message is downstream of belief. And you guys can't figure out what you believe in. And because you can't figure out what you believe in or agree on what you believe in, or even agree on who should be allowed to discuss what you believe in, or who should be in the room. And even if you came up with something, right, who would be the messenger, right? Because you all look around the table and you think you're smarter than everybody else. And then you also have very, interest groups that demand to be at the front of the line, all the other stuff. But to me, practically speaking, what I've seen, Kat, and what I heard in, when the Harris campaign leadership was talking about it, what kept coming back to me was, well, the data told us. The data told us. We were looking at the information we were receiving. And what that says to me is that the party leadership is abdicating its humanity and its messaging to a bunch of machines who don't care about winning, right?
Exactly.
And
also, give me 1 sec. I gotta grab something.
Yeah.
Hello, I'm back.
Hello. The machines, like, they don't care about winning, right? You
No,
give the your
we
algorithm
all
was
saw
written.
War Games.
Right, right. And
We all
read.
saw young Matthew Broderick.
Yeah, well, and read any book about, there was a book I just read about AI. It's like, if you told an AI, an AI run paperclip factory, your job is to make as many paperclips as possible. Like, theoretically, in its worst case, in its Terminator Skynet case, the AI would destroy the world in the service of making paperclips, right? Like, it doesn't have nuance, it doesn't have that humanity, it doesn't have the ability to say, should I destroy the world to make a better paperclip? And to me, I think that's one thing that is fundamentally missing. Is that if the Republican Party is inhuman in too many of the things it says and does, then the Democratic Party is unhuman, that it is afraid to embrace what politics really is, which is a human based, fiction that we create, is a matter of organizing ourselves.
Mm-hmm. I completely agree. And I mean, I think it's you're totally right about like I'm not sure any party should commit to like one platform, frankly. And I know that's a controversial opinion, but that is my own. But I do agree that they can't they can't even fathom the idea of letting other people talk because they do think they're the smartest people in the room. And I saw this a lot when I was at the DNC of,
Mm.
there were 200 creators. I was one of them. And I realized very quickly that I was the token Palestinian creator and that all of the promises to get me to speak to a campaign surrogate were completely bogus. And it became very clear, there were a few that were just there to repeat the party line, but the Democratic Party got so upset because they couldn't control what the other creators were saying. They made it very clear when we started. They were like, oh, free speech. We don't want to, make you say anything. You're covering this just like any reporter, which that's a whole nother topic,
Right,
but I'll talk about that another time.
right,
Um, but then got mad when they realized that we weren't just puppets that would say whatever they wanted. And that's one thing that, whether they like it or not, the Republican Party has. You have dissent. You have the idea of rhinos. I think we need to bring in the idea of dinos, like
right.
Democrats in name only. And, I look at Danny Davis is like 85. His district is 4 blocks down from me. He's been in Congress since the beginning of time. Why do we still have these people if they're not going to be effective? Why are we still allowing ineffective people to stay? And even if they are effective, come on, you gotta, after a while, you guys are like the only generation, not you, but like
Right.
that generation is the only one that will like be able to adequately retire and they just refuse to. God, I would kill to be able to know that I could retire at any age. And I know that I probably won't. Honestly, I'll probably be killed in 2028, executed on live TV,
Let's
if
hope
my
it
online
doesn't come to that.
predictions are right, as they usually are. I'll look really hot when they do it, though. Like that guillotine will be. Uh, but yeah, and I get the idea of like, oh, Democrat bashing isn't helpful, but it's not helpful to just stick your head in the sand. I remember I got these emails after the election that was like, sign this thank you card for Kamala Harris for like trying her best from the Democratic Party.
Mm.
No, because she didn't try her best. And it's not like there weren't people telling the Democrats what to do. I was asked to run a Midwest campaign operation in like swing states like Michigan, Wisconsin, to appeal to like Arabs and Palestinian and anti-war voters. And I said, cool, but like, and I was really honest with them. I was like, you guys have obviously just been pretending this issue doesn't exist. And I understand not wanting to go against the status quo, but it's the numbers. If we're talking about the numbers, they're very clear that in swing states, this is extremely important. And the
Hmm.
states that you already have that are already going to vote blue, where it might be important as well, you're still not going to lose. So, what do you have to lose by doing this? So, I'll do it for free if you just get me 10 or 15 minutes on camera with Kamala Harris or Tim Walz. Fuck it. And they
Right.
said no. And my whole idea was she needs to speak to one Arab person in public. And like just one. And if she won't talk to Ruel Roman, who was supposed to be the speaker at the DNC, if she won't talk to any of the Palestinian people in Congress in public, maybe she'll talk to an influencer, like a 25-year-old bottle blonde girl that looks white to the vast majority of people. and they still wouldn't do that. So, and I know there were so many people behind the scenes that were just begging to do something, and instead they went with Liz Cheney. And I know you and I disagreed with that at the time. Of you thought that there was a way to reach out to those, Nikki Haley type voters, but the young voters, our demographic is so large, especially the women
Comparatively, yeah.
comparatively, and the ones that you would have won with that, which I think was dicey in the first place, you would have lost all of these younger people who don't like Dick Cheney. Um,
Well, and there's a lot of young Republicans who don't like Dick Cheney either,
there's a lot of
right?
young Republicans who don't like Dick Cheney.
A lot of. I mean, I was in London doing a thing with Mehdi Hassan, who you know and work with, and I'm sitting next to this guy on because we're doing this panel, and this is a young guy. He's probably in his 30s, and he's the expats for Trump guy. And he leaned over and he said, "We killed your party, and we're happy about it every day." I said, "All right."
Jesus.
And he goes, and you know what? Like Dick Cheney should be in the Hague on trial as a war criminal. And I'm like,
Completely agree.
wow. But here's the thing though, is like that is as someone who worked for George W. Bush and frankly worked for Dick Cheney, and my dad worked with Dick Cheney when he was in the US House, right? Like that's sort of antithetical to my history with the party. Does that make sense?
Oh,
Like it's
absolutely.
like
I mean, like my family's the same. Like my grandmother was super involved in Texas politics, like saying bad things, but like Dick Cheney or George W. Bush would be like a big
right.
no-no in my
Heresy.
family.
But
Exactly.
that's where you get this weird horseshoe, right? Which is
Yeah.
um again, you guys, I don't know if it's under 35, under 30, you'll have to tell me, but again, it's life is harder to get by, buying a house, whatever it is, right? All of the things that we've sort of that I and my parents and grandparents and your parents and grandparents sort of took for granted is sort of the ladder up into being middle class, upper middle class, whatever it is, stable. Let's even call it just stable and secure.
Yeah.
In America, those things are really not on the table for y'all. And I think that's the one thing too. You mentioned the word status quo. I mean, we shouldn't underestimate the fact that yes, okay, there's this anti-status quo, anti-establishment thing going on around the world. Yes, but let's be clear too: is that there's a really good chance that save COVID in 2020, like Donald Trump would have won a second time, right?
Do you
It
want to
wasn't.
know the secret? Do you want to
Mm,
know how to win?
mm,
Populism. Like
mm,
populism that actually cares about the people. FDR understood this. He gave Americans crave fascism. And so the best way to win and not be a fascist is offer them like the idea of it through good things. And that's these ideas that make you proud that people unite around. I mean, the United Healthcare CEO, there's a reason that the left and right are both like average people are not super mad about it. Um, the Democrats are so fucking bad at branding, and the right is so good at fear mongering, especially
right.
um, by keeping our education system in this chokehold, which is only going to get worse under this Trump administration. They want to keep the people dumb. And so when you're showing people, like the vast majority of Americans like the ACA, but they hate Obamacare, those are the same thing. They
Right.
like the Affordable
Right.
Care Act, but they don't like Obamacare. It's the same fucking thing. And like progressive ideas are popular if you're just not an idiot about how you describe them. If you're like, everyone should be able to, get childcare, like that's great. But if you're like, oh, trying to like tag it to universally unpopular people, not that Obama was universally unpopular, but nowadays, like tying anything to Biden is going to be a death knell. He's now the like Neville Chamberlain of our time. Especially now, he's not doing shit. He's just handing the keys over with no problems. He's not pardoning Has he pardoned the people on federal death row yet?
I don't know.
I don't think he has.
I would venture to
If he
say he
has,
hasn't.
good, but I would guess he hasn't.
Well, I think
Um,
there's also, just as an aside on that too, I think there's a fair amount of personality there too, which is I think he's like f all of you, right?
yeah,
Like
and
you know what, I
that's
did the best I
pathetic.
could, and it is. But you know what, like
He
this is the
ran
problem.
as
This is
he
the
ran
problem with
as a
human based
supposedly
organizations.
one-term. He was supposed to be a one-term president, and he got let his pride. I honestly think it was like, well, Obama got 8 years, and I want 8 years. And I mean, he went through a horrible tragedy in 2015, 2016 with his son, and I can't blame him for not running. But I'm not sure a lot of this would be happening if he had. And I don't think that he should take it out on the American people. Like, we should have had a primary. And
Yeah.
honestly, I think that every single politician should welcome a primary. They should, which of course they're not. They want to keep power, but you should be held accountable. I always say, like, if I get something wrong in my videos, or if I
Right.
say something fucked up, even if it's accidental, I want people to hold me accountable. I don't get mad about that. And people pretend this primary was anything but show. There is no goddamn reason that in our two-party system, our country that is so firmly entrenched in this two-party system,
Right.
that either candidate should get third place in any district.
Yeah. And that
That's
happened, was
pathetic.
that happened
Dearborn.
in Dearborn, right? Yeah, because
Yeah.
she finished behind Jill Stein, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And Jill Stein's a grifter. I say this all the
Right.
time. She's a grifter. And I think that Trump will be worse with Palestinian people. And I genuinely think, I mean, I might have been totally wrong, but there's no way to know now, that there was a bit of like almost like Jimmy Cartering, like sandbagging of, I want to seem really pro war on this front and then try, because she was the only person in the Biden administration to express any sympathy for Palestinian civilians.
Right.
But going all out on war, people just don't want that anymore, especially when we're struggling paycheck to paycheck. It's ridiculous. So, yeah, populism, trying to cater to what people actually want, not doing this instead of going into like racism and anti-trans panic and all this shit. How about we do populism and let's make sure everyone has what they need? But that would mean, of course, standing up against the rich and powerful. And the Democratic Party and the Republican Party are too fucking greedy to do that.
Yeah, well, that's because, again, I mean, let me go back to the Biden thing in the one term. I mean, yes, there's his pride, right, and the family's pride, but also, I think about the time that I worked at the White House, and this, I assume this hasn't changed that much since then. Is like there are only like 7 people in the White House who can walk into the Oval Office without an appointment, right? They can it's literally called walk-in privileges, and those people want to keep those jobs, right? You're literally running the world. And I'm not saying it's right, but like those people want those jobs to continue. And if that means that they had to do whatever it was to, make President Biden, either not encourage him to step aside, right? Or just, when he said, I think I'm going to run again, they said, yes, Mr. President, that seems like a really good idea. You've done so much. Like, I'm not at all surprised. It's upsetting and it's disappointing. And we are now where we are. But again, you mentioned, there's the wealthy, there's the powerful, but also, in my experience, I was just back in Washington, D.C. before Thanksgiving for my dad's memorial service. And I saw a bunch of people, like, the town's already gotten in line, right? Like the town, 2 weeks after the election, like the town had gotten in line. Okay, Trump's going to come in. It's like PR, and public affairs firms and lobbying firms. Okay, well, we're Republicans. Do we have the right Republican to make contact with the Trump administration? We're a Democratic firm. Who do we have to hire to make sure that, our clients believe that we still have the ability to, at least make contact or communicate, let alone, persuade somebody in, name your department, right? And so, like, we forget it's a company town, right? I call them political bureaucrats, right? That, there were people who were in the Biden administration who will now go back to whatever firm or whatever association they were at, right? And now there were people who were at these associations or think tanks or front groups from MAGA who will now go into the government, and it's a revolving door. And it frankly has little, if not zero, concern for, the 900 guys and gals out of work in Wisconsin Rapids when 2 years ago the paper mill went out of business, right?
Yep.
And we're driving by, and I'm like, so what happened? Oh, the paper mill went out of business. They said it was too expensive. I'm like, oh, did anybody ever consider that thing is like a mile long and 400 feet tall? Maybe you should tell the company, okay, you're going to pay to have those same 900 people take the damn thing apart, right?
Mhm.
And then because I assume once you've dismantled it, Kat, the environmental remediation, given all the stuff that goes into making paper, is probably pretty significant too. You got a whole nother 5 or 6 years, and that's not make work. That's protecting the people in the community that live there, right?
And
And
I mean,
that's to me, like, that's not socialism. Like, that makes sense, if that makes sense.
yeah. And I mean, this, so many people will roll their eyes when I say this, but like money is fake. All of this is fake. Our
Well,
society's
once we went off the gold standard under Richard Nixon, it wasn't even tied to anything tangible.
yeah, money is fake. We are the richest country in the world. We can do whatever we want. We choose not to help our people. And admitting defeat, like this defeatist mindset, is so frustrating to me. It's like when I was a kid and my brother used to bully me and I would complain about it, and I'd have teachers that would go, "Well, that's what big brothers are supposed to do." No, they're not.
Right. They're supposed to
No,
protect
they're
you.
not. They're not supposed to put me in a laundry hamper and put a bunch of encyclopedias on top. That's not an excuse. What if I did that to someone? Would you say, "Well, that's what little sister is supposed to?" No, you would yell at me and then tell me to like keep my legs closed or something. So why do we just keep inventing excuses to not do anything? And I encourage anyone to listening to this. You can do things. You can
Right.
run for office. Like even if you don't win, you can make your local politicians, whether it's on the state or national level or just your city, feel the heat. You can make them realize that they're not safe, that their power isn't guaranteed. You can also just do things in your local community. There's this cat named Harpo online who's very
Mm.
sweet, and he carries a little stuffed octopus with him everywhere. And he recently passed, and I was very sad about it. And I was like, you know what? I'm going to round up all of my old towels and blankets and go down to the animal shelter and donate them. And a bunch of other people did that too. You can just do shit like that. You can
Right.
help the people in your community. And I feel like nowadays, especially when we're so disconnected, we just feel helpless.
Yep.
And guess what? We're not helpless. I started a women's club that
Mm.
meets at my place every month, and it's honestly the best. It has made my life so much better. We don't drink or anything. We just have like last month we had tea and cider, and I taught them how to embroider, and we didn't look at our phones once, like not on
Right.
purpose. We just didn't. And that person to person connection is so important. And especially post pandemic, we've just kind of gotten rid of it.
Right.
And I think that works to the benefit of these entrenched powers. So just like think about it a little bit. If you're like, there's something I want to change in my community, not just my life, but something that affects other people, even if it's just a random act of kindness, even if it's getting your friends together, if it's going to your, city hall meeting once a month and being like, hey, what the fuck? You can do that.
Right.
No one's stopping you. And the consequences, I mean, these might change in the next 4 years, but the consequences for doing a lot of things, like especially social interactions, they're not really that serious. Like I always say the worst things that can happen are like you go to jail for the rest of your life or you die. And for 99% of interactions or things you can do in your life, neither of those things will happen.
Right. No, and I 100% agree with you, and I think that's post pandemic, and then it's with the exception of eating, sleeping, going to the bathroom, and going to work, right? Like you can live inside your phone if you want, right? And that's what the social media companies desperately want, right? They're just trying to hoover up your attention, and like that's not a new problem. Um, but I think you're 100% right, and again, that's just to go back in the listeners have heard me say this. That was the other part too about getting out and seeing people. It could have been in New York City, it could have been in Raleigh, Durham, North Carolina, it could have been in Grand Rapids, Michigan. Is like there are people in their communities who care desperately for their communities, and there is more good out there, Kat, than people think,
Absolutely.
right? There are a lot
Absolutely.
of people who, and to your point, like it doesn't, if you're trying to recruit 100 people and 10 people say yes, and one person actually does something, like that's a win, right?
Yeah.
That's a win. And this is the other part too, is like this stuff is work, right?
Yeah.
Now, it's work that I'd rather do, frankly, than anything else, because I'm not sure I'm qualified to do anything else. But it is work. But for the most part, the people that do it, like the satisfaction comes from the fact not that like, oh, I did this, but that we did this, right? And that
Right.
you had an idea, you carried it through, and voila. Oh, it worked. You know why? Because most people are like, yes, I'll do that. Like you said, you have women over to your apartment to talk, right? Because that is one of those things. And just going back to what you and I were talking about at the top is like, it doesn't, look, I don't care if you're talking about politics, if you're talking about life, if you're talking about football, like whatever it is. The point is that human interaction. And I mean, when I'm not just like you and I are looking at each other on video, but I'm talking about when humans get together, there's this like friction. And I don't mean it in a
Yeah.
bad way, but I mean it's a friction where there's a heat
There's
created.
energy.
Yeah, that's a better word. There's energy created. It's almost like Velcro. Now those you're connected to those people, right? And to tear you apart is a lot of work, just like Velcro, right? You
Right.
have to, but it's one of those things where the more that we can do that, the better off we'll be. And to me, I think to your point, Republicans don't want that, right? They've been scamming,
Right.
state and local, citizens, voters, whatever for decades at this point, right? Because they'll keep them angry.
Right.
And look, I think you just to step back about education too. Look, I think that for fascist or fascist entities, fascist movements, right? Keep them dumb, keep them poor, keep them scared, right?
Right. I
And
mean, I did
that's
a whole hour-long explainer on like the history of fascism and white Christian nationalism, where we go into this. Like that's
yeah,
what fascist movements always start with, whether it's Nazi Germany, whether it's the Soviet Union, whether it's the Cultural Revolution, they go after education. And sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you, but
yeah,
I do think like I'm gonna tell a story that I told you once, but hope
sure,
and strength are contagious. When I was in high school, I went to Catholic school, and we had this thing called Kairos, and it's like a retreat, and all the students bond. It's really fun, and you kind of like talk about your life and any like secret that you divulge. If someone says it, like you're instantly shunned by the rest of the school. It's the
mm,
only time I've ever seen teenagers like not be assholes to each other. And we used to meet like every 2 months in the chapel, and there'd be like 50 of us, and we kind of do like a mini Kairos. And I had a stalker in high school. It was really traumatic. It was a fellow student, and during that little mini Kairos, I got up and I started to tell the story. I didn't mention his name or anything. I just felt so the school had removed me from classes that we shared with him. I was no longer a graduation speaker. It was really traumatic for me.
yeah,
And I got about a page into this pre-written statement, and a teacher came up and said that she didn't want the other student to feel bad, so I needed to stop talking. And I
yep,
said okay and walked out. About 50 people in that room. And the only person that walked out with me was my friend Carter. And I think about that all the time.
sure,
And I know that the other students do too, because I had so many people contact me, like underclassmen, after I left school that were like, I didn't stand for bullshit anymore because of what Carter did, because he realized there were no consequences for his action. And that inspired younger students to do the same thing, to be able to walk out. I mean, it's like when you have any significant movement, if one person stands up, other people feel safe to do it. And, if you stand up to some asshole that's yelling at a cashier, the next time someone sees that, they'll remember you doing that and
right.
stand up for the cashier next time. It's just, I think people underestimate the power that they have as individuals. And all of this shit, the feeling that you can do something, it's contagious. And for once, I mean, I think just cough right in the face of that unmasked person.
Well,
Do
look,
something.
right. I mean, look, I think that's right. And I think that's one of those things why, from my perspective, well, let's talk a little bit about solutions. And then I want to get to a couple other things. Is that, you know, the problems that we face as a country, as a society, as a community, whether or not that's nationally or statewide or local, are not going to be solved by a bunch of people who are worried about, their own stuff, inside the Beltway or the Acela corridor. It's going to start in those local areas. And I 100% agree with you. And as I said, I think that there's a lot of fertile ground out there, right? I don't think that, there are a lot of people who otherwise would prefer to be angry all the time. Because first of all, it's exhausting, right?
Yeah.
It's freaking exhausting. But we shouldn't underestimate the power of what my old party and the Trump people have been doing for the better part of 50 years. Like, the Joe Rogan, right? Like, oh, we'd have to have our Joe Rogan is 40 years downstream of Rush Limbaugh, right? Like, it's not a
Right.
new phenomenon. But it's one of those things where, even if Rush Limbaugh had incredible ratings, or, however many millions of people listen to Joe Rogan, that still means like 97% of the country doesn't. Does that make
Right.
sense? Right. So like all this stuff gets overblown. Like, yeah, it can have it can have an effect. There's no question about it, but it's marginal. And if you are there to battle back against that margin and provide, again, yes, positivity. Okay, people like, oh, hope and change was BS. Okay, maybe it was, but you know what? Hope and change is make America great again in the major key. They're the same
Right.
thing, right? And so that's one of those things. It's I was listening to this podcast last night, and they're like, people have philosophies and everything else, but really they utilize the words of philosophies to accomplish the things they want to accomplish, right? It might not necessarily be a new philosophy. Well, of course, there's nothing really new in humanity, right? Everything's sort of a retread, but that's okay, right? There's nothing wrong with that. Like if something worked before, use it again. And to your point about populism, like populism does not have to degenerate into fascism or into communism. You can say like, no, we want to put these people at the front of the list or at the top of the list, at the front of the line. I'm knock on wood, short of being, hounded out of the country or put on a list somewhere, Kat, like I'm probably going to be okay. Right. And so to me, the idea that like you wouldn't go out and listen, right? You wouldn't go out and talk. And like, I think that listening is a good first step to your point. But I think that if someone's given you the opportunity to speak your piece, they want something in return. They don't want just a blank stare, right? And they don't want BS like, we hear you and we believe you and we agree. Now I'm going to get back on an airplane and I'm going to go back to New York City. Thank you for your time. Right? Like that's not community. That's not frankly humanity. That's just like one more guy trying to figure out how do I get over on this person? Does that make sense? How do
Yeah.
I convince, like, and you can convince someone the right way, you can convince someone the wrong way. Trump and his people have clearly convinced people the wrong way, but it works. And I'm not saying we
Right.
should do more of it. In fact, I think we should do none of it at all. But at the same time, like, I think we should take every opportunity to punch Trump and MAGA in the face when we get the opportunity. But I think we also have to figure out, like, okay, let's just use for instance right now. Donald Trump and Elon Musk are telling the Republican members of the U.S. House to shut down the government. Okay. Like, I'm not going to light what's left of my hair on fire about that, but I think it's worth saying, to somebody in a turmoil, like, this guy, like, look what they're doing. This is not going to hurt them. It's going to hurt you,
Right.
right? There, or in Western North Carolina, there's like $100 billion in disaster relief funding. That ain't going to happen now
Yeah.
because these people don't care. Right. And you don't have to be hyperbolic about it. You just have to say, like, this is what's going on. Are you okay with that?
Right.
And the answer is probably not, right? But again, the idea that if it's like, oh, well, we have to spend all our time in the clouds and none of our time on the ground, then it's not going to work.
Right. You're absolutely
Um,
right.
so let me ask you this.
Mhm.
And this is just me personally. Since the election, and maybe this is just a natural reaction, but I just want to talk about social media. I mean, I have found Twitter is now fundamentally unusable. Elon has
Completely.
made it that way. I used to go there because, my friends were there, my colleagues were there were reporters there. There was news to be had. There was an interesting discussion. Like, that's all out the window.
Yeah.
Now you have something like a blue sky that's sort of, the Twitter of the left, which I don't find particularly compelling either, because it's just the same people saying the same things to each other. Um, and so my social, with the exception of like when I post stuff like this, post things I write, share things maybe that you've done or other people have done, like I don't find it like my consumption on traditional social media is way down, way down. And
Same.
if I'm going to go to like an Instagram, it's going to go to reels where I can like watch about Texas Longhorn football or something else, if that makes sense. Like, I think so. I'm curious, like, have you felt the same? And then if that's the case, how do you see, given that you're so far out, on the, compared to me, on the cutting edge of how to communicate with people, have you felt that too? And like, where's the next way to connect people? Because it was a very efficient for its time way to connect.
I mean, I use Blue Sky more. I think that you just need to like curate your feeds and make
Mhm.
sure, because it's not just the left, but like just make sure that you're following the right people. But you're used to Twitter where you've been there since like I've been there since 2014. So I had all these people that I knew and like had this feed that had been curated over 10 years. And then where did that go?
Mhm.
Um, and so I think I put do not disturb on my computer. Um, I think that honestly, I just think that it's going to get more and more separated. I think
Mhm.
YouTube is having another boom, and that's where I do a lot of my stuff. Uh, and that's even more disconnected from like a Twitter or a Blue Sky where you're directly interacting. It's like
Right.
this is a piece of media and you're talking to that person, but you're not talking to anyone else.
Right.
Um, I know that I make my living on social media, but I encourage everyone to log off.
Right. No, I look, and I found, for sure, like I feel a lot better. And here, this is the one thing too I was thinking about it, which is like, even if you want to be, involved in American politics, which is rough. I don't disagree with that. Like, there are 24 hours in the day, right? Let's say
Right.
you're awake 16 hours of them. Like, you should spend a couple of them doing something that's like, outside of work, that's completely unrelated to this stuff, right? Because
Knitting.
knitting, right? Because otherwise you just get burned out. And this is what I said on a recording I made earlier in the week. Is like, the bad guys are way better at being sustained in that anger zone than otherwise normal human beings are, right?
Right.
Like, they've conditioned those people over the course of, again, not just 5 years or 10 years, but really 30 or 40 years. Like, you don't have to join that crew, right? Like,
Yeah.
you don't have to be the antidote to, being, outraged about what Dan Bongino said is not more Dan Bongino, right? Or
Right.
whatever your version of Dan Bongino is. It's like less of that. And I think too that when you can turn off also that, that radar screen in our head that gets all fuzzed out, because of so much crap that's being thrown into the air, left, right, center, whatever it is, right? Clarity starts to come back too. And it's good for your brain, it's good for your psyche, it's good for your body, everything. It's probably good for your family and your friends. I mean, you know, when we have friends over, like, I never talk about politics. If somebody wants to talk about it, like, Kat, I'm happy to talk about it, but like, I never bring it up. It's the
I get
last thing in
so
the world.
sick when people are like, "Oh, you want to hear what Trump did?" And I'm like, "No,
No, I
I
know what
already
he did.
know. I
I
know what he
already
did. I
know,
don't
right?
like what I always say is I watch these people so you don't have to, like these right-wing morons.
Hmm.
Um, so I just really encourage people. There's so many news outlets that are just capitulating to Trump. I highly recommend people follow specific journalists that they trust
Right,
and listen to like you everyone should be alert. I mean, fascism relies on us ignoring it.
right,
But that's why people like me exist. So that way we can do it and you can understand what's happening without having to wade through all that sludge yourself.
right.
Um and even then, like I make sure I take time to play with my cat and, knit a scarf or like a little headband or whatever. Because otherwise I'll go insane. So
Which
I
is
just I
also what they
really
want.
which is also what they want. So I really encourage people to just log off a bit more. Um, find specific journalists, individuals you trust, because there are a lot of these really great organizations that have great journalists, but like I don't blame people. I canceled my New York Times subscription last year after all of their really irresponsible reporting on Gaza. Um, but there are plenty of really incredible journalists at the New York Times that I respect very much and I respect their work. So finding those people and making sure to check sources, making sure to find things in like three places or more. If it sounds too good or too bad to be true, it probably is.
Right,
Um, like I always tell people, don't just trust what I say implicitly. Everyone is fallible. And I mean, I said this in my New Republic op-ed right after the election, but like the dirty secret of politics is those people are just as dumb as you and me.
right.
um,
Believe me.
and it's the same about every other facet of the world. Journalism, influencing, uh, hell, your mechanic probably makes mistakes on a bad day. So just find people you trust and
But
make
here's the
sure
difference.
that you still trust
Somebody
them.
had to teach the mechanic how to be a mechanic so he or
Yeah,
she
that's
could
true.
fix a car, right? Nobody in I guess our business or our world, like, all you have to do is turn on your camera and start yakking, right? There's no
Yeah.
prerequisite. Like, you
Except me, because I'm perfect.
well, yes, of course.
Yeah.
But like, I couldn't open the hood of my car and like understand anything other than like where to put the wiper fluid, right?
I
Like, I don't
probably could, but once again, I'm perfect.
no, I can change a tire, right? I can do that. I can drive a
I've stopped
trailer.
driving, so this
Well,
is not a
that's
problem for me.
yeah, that's nice.
I know this is a metaphor that I started, but I just want to make it very clear it doesn't apply to me.
Right, of course.
Because once
Um,
again, the entire world is about me.
well,
Anyways.
look, I mean, we're all the stars of our own movies, right? So, and
No,
you're the biggest. Oh no.
thank you. Thank you. Thank you. That's where I was going with it. I hope anyone listening to this knows this is a bit. I am not this conceited. Um,
I used to be, and then reality repeatedly hit me in the head with a frying pan. So it took a while, but all right, Kat. Before first and foremost, thanks for coming. Before we let you go, where can our listeners and our viewers find your work?
You can find me on my videos on YouTube and TikTok, at least until January 19th. On YouTube after January 19th, you can find me Kat, KATM ABU, so Kat Amabu. I'm also on other places, Blue Sky, Kat Amabu. I'll have link trees on all of those so you can find my other websites because I have a really long last name and my usernames differ. Also, I have a Patreon where I post a picture of my cat every single day. Her name is Heater. She is wonderful. It's $1 a month. You can edit that to be more if you'd like. You'll support my work and also get 30 to 31 free cat pictures every single month. So that's patreon.com/catmabu.
As always, gang, thank you, Kat. And as always, gang, you can find me on Twitter, Blue Sky, and TikTok, as long as they're around, at Reed Galen, on Threads and Instagram, at Reed_Galen USA, on Substack at the home front. And guys, if you're watching this on YouTube, please like and subscribe. If you're listening to it on Apple or Spotify, please subscribe, follow, give us a 5-star rating, keep us moving. Thank you. Before I forget, go to sez.us, SEZ.us, the social media platform for sanity. And as always, guys, go to jointheunion.us. We have a lot coming up in the new year, but we're going to need your help, not only in places like Virginia and Wisconsin and New Jersey, but in all 50 states. And thank you as always. Kat, thanks again for joining me.
Thanks for having me.
And everybody else, we'll see you next time.